On behalf of the Professional Writers Association, and also known as PWAC, to this morning's panelist presentations on the art of interviewing. My name is Stella Constance. I will be your moderator for this morning's panel forum. These experienced panelists offer tips and tricks to dig deeper into the issues and experiences that are important to today's readers. It is through the art of interviewing, which strengthens the content of both non-fictional and fictional writings. Now I would like to introduce the panelists to you from left to right: Paul Verhaegh, Marie Powell, and Robert Bott. Starting the panel presentations is Paul Verhaegh. He writes for an online Calgary regional live music performance magazine. He also writes for the publishers in the Netherlands, specializing in tax and legal topics. And he is currently serving on the board of PWAC as the regional director for the Prairies and the North. Let's welcome Paul Verhaegh, who will share with us some of his interviewing tips.
Thank you. Now, what sort of interviewer do you want to be? An interview starts basically with making someone talk. Every person wants to tell a story. Like a car salesman once said, the only thing I do is take away the obstacles that block the prospective buyer from buying the car. It is the same with making people talk. Take the obstacles away and they start telling you their story. If you don't believe me, ask any experienced police detective. The biggest obstacle could be you, by the way, the interviewer. Realize that the interview is about the story, it's not about you. So keep your ego at bay and don't get in the way of the flow of information. Once someone is talking, the listening begins. The better you listen, the smoother the interview. The interviewee will give you plenty of leads, not only in what he or she says, but also in the way it's said, and even in the things that are not said. A sudden hesitation before responding to a question, an experienced interviewer will sense that this could be the spot to start digging. When political or social engagement is your engine, your motto could be, there are people you don't talk to, you write against them. When that is the case, prepare to be seen more as an activist than as a journalist, or at least as a partisan one. What is your relationship to the interviewee, if any? When interviewing a person with whom you have a professional relationship or who's your friend, it could be wise to disclose it to the audience up front in order to avoid the need for an explanation afterwards, once your audience finds out. Like experienced journalists say, eventually everything comes to light. This goes for media secrets too, of course. Your interviewee has a voice. Is the processed product that you come up with the voice of the interviewee, or is it not a voice? Where's your voice in the interview, or the voice of the medium that you represent? To what extent should the voice of the interviewer or the medium be heard in the interview at all? The interviewee is a subject in his or her objective reality. Not only is the interviewee a different person, but also a person in a different context. Realizing this will help you to see things in perspective. Do realize that the way you treat the interviewee reflects what sort of person you are. In the eye of the audience, it is your way of doing things that defines you more than anything else. The choice is yours. The face that you choose to show the world is what the world will regard as what you are. Thank you.
Marie Powell is our second panelist. She is a multi-genre author who has writings that widely range from journalism to creative and children's nonfiction, historical and other fiction, to research for documentary film and television, nonprofits and arts organizations. Let's welcome Marie Powell as she shares with us some of her interview techniques.
I'm really glad to see you all here this morning. It's really nice of you to come to our session, and I hope that we're able to give you some ideas. I have used interviews for about 30 years now. I have 4 university degrees and a teaching certificate. One of my degrees is in journalism. I've taught journalism and I've taught journalistic research. But I'm also a working journalist, so I use these, and I'm a fiction writer, and I've used interviewing even in my fiction writing. And I want to tell you all, for starters, that the one right you all have, is the right to ask questions. I tell this to my students too, right? It's the only right you really have, to ask. People may not answer, but you have the right to ask the questions. And that to me is the key to interviewing. So in the journalist toolbox, you have kind of three main things. You have data, you have documents, and you have interviews. And the interviews are really the most important things. So I think of two things that are key to me in doing an interview. One is a strong interview is based on strong questions. And to me, a strong question comes out of research. That's who I am, right? The 4 university degrees kind of tells you that, right? Anyway, research to me is a big part of what I do. And I also think the second most important key to doing an interview is to listen. Because you have to have a keen interest in the answers to the questions, right? And listen to the people as they're speaking to you and kind of feed off of them. That's my process. And I hope it translates this morning into some information for you. In journalism, you call documents and data secondary sources, right? So to me, what I do is I mine the secondary sources, and I'm looking for gold, right? I'm just like a miner looking for, I don't know, uranium, gold, whatever. So I'm looking at the secondary sources, and I'm mining them for things like context. What's the bigger picture here? What does it all mean? Who gains? Who loses? Right? Those questions that are kind of key to any issue or any subject that you may be looking at. So I'm starting with people. And anybody that seems interesting in this field, I'm writing down their name. I'm writing down where did they live? Where did they work? Who do they know? Is there some neighbors or friends mentioned in the article? I'll write those names down too, because I don't quite know where I'm going to get the contact information from at the beginning. So I'm looking at that. I'm looking at timelines, maps, data. I'm looking to verify facts. Weird thing about secondary sources is that sometimes the facts conflict. You get one date here, one date here. So I got to find we call that triangulating. I got to find a third source to see if I can find the same date. Then I know I probably have the accurate one, right? And I also have a question to ask. If I find a discrepancy in the secondary sources, I've got to ask my primary sources, who are the interview subjects, right? What the answer, which is the right. Was it this date or this date? When did it start? What was the first meeting? Do you remember? Those kinds of questions come to me as I'm doing research. My question list as a print journalist is maybe 20, 25 questions. When I was in documentary film, it was 225 to 250 questions.
Wow.
And I was the researcher, so I wasn't the interviewer, so I couldn't think of those alternate questions while I'm listening. I had to listen in advance, right? So I might do a pre-interview or something like that with the person and try and ask some of my questions, and then from that I'm developing even more questions. And the other thing is that you have to be able to write a question in maybe, well, let's say at least 3 ways, especially an important question, because the person may not answer it. They may talk around it. They may just evade it, kind of, it doesn't make them feel comfortable or whatever, so they evade you a little bit, and then you can very deftly and gracefully bring it back in without antagonizing the subject, because you don't want to do that. You don't want to challenge them in that sense, at least in my end of the business. Maybe if you're an investigative interviewer or a political interviewer or something like that, you don't want to challenge people. But in my case, I'm looking for information. So I want to be able to bring that question in another way. So I might have 3 different wordings of the same question in that 225 that I'm writing, right? And then my question list always starts with biography, because I feel like those are the easy questions. Not always, I must say, but usually people can tell you where they were born, what they worked at, what they did, where they grew up, that kind of stuff. So I'll start with that. So sometimes a dumb question can really help you, And also don't be afraid to admit you don't know. Like just if they're talking about something, I'm sorry, I don't quite understand. Could you help me visualize that? Just tell me a little, so you can re-ask in that way while you go to on the fly. And I would say always, my plan is to always leave the door open at the end. I don't antagonize or challenge, what the interviewer, if I can help it. And I will find ways to re-ask if I need to. But I try to leave the door open at the end for a follow-up interview, because I can guarantee you're not going to get the information you need the first time. At least I'm not, usually. I usually need to go back to that person and clarify something somewhere along the line as I get writing things up, right? So, yeah, that's my process, and, I'm happy to answer questions after too. So, yeah.
Robert Bott is our third panelist. He's done 54 years of writing, ranging from wire service reporting, newspaper and magazine writing, to educational and historical projects, books and oral history, as well as corporate and industrial work, to radio and television. Let's welcome Robert Bott, who will be sharing with us his interview secrets.
Probably done well over 1,000 face-to-face interviews in my career, and thousands if you count phone interviews. But in all that time, I couldn't recall a single celebrity interview, except for one. And it's kind of an interesting story. It was in 1969 with John Lennon. After their wedding, he and Yoko Ono went on a round-the-world bed-in for peace. I had forgotten about all of this until 20 years later, when some friends saw I happened to have kept a copy of the photo, and they took it off and they framed it, and so I put it on the wall, and now it's become part of my lore. I'm the guy who interviewed John Lennon. The tools of the trade, the two, as people mentioned, are the notebook and the recorder. The notebook, you can keep track of things, and that'll be really useful later if for instance, if you've got an hour-long recording and there are only a few facts or quotes that you need. If you have the notes, you know the chronology, it'll be easy to find. When I worked in radio, you actually tried to keep track of the time so that you could get the clip. And oh God, what a pain that was. I'm not good at doing three things at once. But the audio recorder has made a huge difference. And I think I started using an audio recorder when I was with UBI in Ottawa because politicians would often sneak things into an interview. I remember just before Canada recognized China in 1970. I interviewed Mitchell Sharp, the External Affairs Minister, and it was only when I listened to the tape of the interview that I realized that he was dropping all these clues that the recognition was coming very soon. Keep your eyes out. But it was really subtle, and when sitting there in the room, I didn't have a clue. I find video recording, which I've had to do for oral histories and when I worked in television, video recording is a whole different ball of wax. It changes the dynamics in the room. There's this third party, sometimes they'll relax after a while, but initially there's a lot more self-consciousness in a video interview. And so you have to be better prepared for it. Some other tools are, of course, your ears. You've got to pick up those clues, and as my colleagues have mentioned, those things that you have to follow up on. Your eyes, the person's body language, the other stuff in the room, the mementos maybe on the wall, pictures of their kids or giant marlin on the wall, whatever. It can add color to your eventual reporting or writing. I always say my eyebrows are a really, really good tool. Really? Most important one of all is silence. Unless you're in a real rush a real time limit, give them 5 or 10 seconds after they finish, because they'll often think of something else that they want to add. And it also, allows a little segue into your next point. It makes a huge difference whether it's what I call a naive or sophisticated subject. A lot of those small business people I interviewed had never been written about. And you give them a lot of leeway because they're not comfortable in the situation, they don't really know what's happening. And if they change their mind or if something's off the record, you give them the benefit of the doubt and try to work around that. Whereas if somebody's a CEO or an elected politician, there's really no leeway. If it's not off the record unless you say that this is going to be off the record. There's ground rules, colleagues will also mention, how much time are you gonna have? Will there be a third party present? Oh, the minder. With politicians and big business people, there's often some PR person or somebody in the room. And that again, it's like the TV camera, it changes the dynamics. You're not having that one-on-one give and take. The eye contact for sensitive topics, I often put down the notebook and look them in the eye, and when we're getting into the real nitty-gritty, because I know the recorder's still running, but it helps them to open up. And then the follow-up, as I mentioned, use your notes to find the key items that you've got to follow up on, which you can often do on the phone or by email. For the last about 30 years, have been doing mostly commissioned work where we could pay to have transcripts. And boy, having your transcripts in the computer where you can search them is just a great asset. It takes about 3 hours of transcription time. 1 hour of tape or recording is about 3 hours of somebody's typing time. So if you can find a secretary for $25 or $30 an hour, it works out to about $100 for an hour.
They will be around. If you have further questions, feel free to approach them, just because, we have to prepare the room for the next group. Okay?